This
Jennifer.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay. My name's Jennifer Treff. I work for the law office of Darlene Wakefield. Just to give you a little background, I've been representing children and child in need of assistance proceedings full-time 2001 and even part-time before that. So I've been doing this for a while. I really appreciate CASA. I always find cases where there is a CASA appointed go much better, and I've always had a great relationship with CASA. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about what is the difference maybe between a court-appointed attorney and CASA, what is a guardian ad litem, what is a CASA, and how all of these terms sort of differ depending on what state you're in, and then I'll get a little more specific about Maryland. Anyhow, the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act, which is called CAPTA, required states to document in their state provisions for appointing a guardian ad litem to represent children's best interest in every case of abuse or neglect proceedings. This statute, which is a federal statute, was recently amended in 2018. I think the site I have to it is 2017, but it was updated to protect people who make claims of child abuse and call in reports to make sure they're protected. The GL may be an attorney or a court-appointed special advocate or both. Normally, they're persons who've received some kind of training, just as you're doing in this area. The GAO represents the child at all judicial proceedings related to the case and has responsibilities for performing under CAPTA the following tasks: obtain firsthand clear understanding of the situation and the child's needs, and make recommendations to the court concerning the best interest of the child. To be eligible for funding under CAPTA, because a lot of the state's funding comes from the federal government, a state is required to submit to the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Human Services a written plan for improving the state's child protective services. The plan must include assuring the state has effect laws, policies, and procedures that address specific issues required by CAPTA. At state level, statutes specify when the court appoints a representative and whom they may appoint for a child involved in an abuse or neglect proceeding. As described in the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges Enhanced Resource Guidelines Improving the Court Practice for Child Abuse Neglect Cases, there are several ways that a child's interests can be represented. In some instances, two or more of the representatives may work on the case at the same time. A GAL, a guardian ad litem, may be appointed to investigate and advocate for the child's best interest. Also, an attorney may be appointed to specifically advocate for the child's position and express wishes before the court or the child's best interest. A CASA may be appointed to assist the court by investigating a child's circumstances, providing recommendations on meeting the child's needs. All states, the District of Columbia, American Samoa, Guam, North Marine Islands, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands provide in their statutes for the appointment of representation of children involved in child abuse or neglect proceedings. Approximately 41 of the states, as well as some of the territories, provide for the appointment of a guardian ad litem, also called GAL, to represent the best interest of the child. In 15 of the states, the District of Columbia, the Virgin Islands, the GAL must be an attorney. In Montana, a CASA may or may not be an attorney, can have an attorney, and they can also appoint and can be appointed as a GAL. So CASAs in Montana can be appointed regardless of whether you have training as an attorney. In other states, volunteers may be appointed to serve as GALs. 16 states require the appointment of an attorney for the child. In addition, 7 require both an attorney and a GAL. In 4 states, If the GAL is not an attorney, counsel can actually be appointed to represent the GAL. In all cases, the appointment of a GAL, an attorney, or a CASA is made by the court who has jurisdiction over the child abuse or neglect proceedings. In Maryland, the court appoints an attorney for whom the Department of Human Resources is contracted to provide legal services. In addition to the appointment of an attorney, Maryland also allows the appointment of an individual provided by the court's Special Advocate CASA program pursuant to Courts and Judicial Proceedings Article 3830. Approximately 49 states have some kind of CASA program. I think that's updated from the last time I did a speech on that. So that's wonderful, and I think that's great progress. In 16 states, the CASA may serve also as the GAL, and I think we went over some of these statistics again. Sorry, I'm using my iPad, so I've got to put it down, move to the next page, then blow it up because I can't see very well anymore. And in the material I provided you, it continues to go into the histories of where CASAs are important and maybe how they differ a little bit from the guardian ad litem, which sometimes is an attorney, sometimes is not. Approximately 46 states require training for the person who is going to be the guardian ad litem, the attorney, or the CASA. Maryland Human Resources, through their contract, tells all attorneys working on the case that you have to at least have 12 hours of training a year in areas of child abuse and neglect, early childhood roles, responsibilities for being a child advocate, mental health needs, education, substance abuse, cultural awareness, the juvenile court process, appellate process, federal state laws. And CASA, by the way, holds wonderful trainings throughout the year that attorneys at my firm definitely take advantage of when we find out about them in all of these areas. In addition to the trainings, volunteers are screened and interviewed prior to being accepted as a GAL or a CASA. Attorneys working under the Senate contract are also required to undergo a criminal background check. One of the first things when I was hired by this current firm is I, of course, had to do the criminal background check, even though I'd been doing this for close to 20 years before that. And then I get into specific duties that I, as child's attorney, am required to do. How I am as child's attorney and different perhaps from a CASA is that my job is to represent my client's interest, which may be their best interest, and it may be what they want me to advocate for. And my job as their attorney is, first of all, to figure out, do they have considered judgment? And in doing that, are they able to express a reasoned choice to me and provide a position that I can advocate for? Sorry. I'm sorry, there. I'm sorry, having trouble going to next page. In order to determine that a child has considered judgment, there are guidelines written into the Maryland rules that I'm required, if I have any concern, to submit. And when you're working with a client, you and I may be on the same page in terms of what your position is, because a CASA would be taking a best interest position. And sometimes we're not necessarily on the same page, because I may have a 14 or 15-year-old who tells me they want to go home, despite the fact that I know that home may not be the safest or the best place. But I have to determine whether, they have the cognitive ability to make that decision, and they're expressing a relevant decision, and they're able to give me well thought out reasons as to why they want that position. And even if I know this particular family may not be the best place for the child, I still have a duty by law, if they have considered judgment, to advocate for that position. But that's also why CASA are so incredibly important in these cases, because you do provide an alternate view in terms of what's really going on in this family, what are the dynamics of the family, why it might be better for the child to stay in the placement they are at, to finish that out, what would be some of the barriers if they came home, because we've all seen young people get sent home too quickly and not necessarily end up in a good situation. But the guidelines set out how that decision is made. Um, are My next topic is the types of proceedings I represent children in. Is that something you've gone over in your training, Sally?
So, sorry, Sally.
Or Kristen? Fine.
So by types, are you talking about like the types of hearings? I'm sorry, I missed that
Yeah,
question.
type of hearings.
Yeah, we already went in for that.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
All right.
I have a quick question real quick, if that's okay. So I was wondering, so basically us as a CASA, we are to advocate for what the child wants primarily, but also give all the other aspects and details, whereas your job is more to give like down to the fact of like, you know, this isn't a good decision. Like, where is that line kind of drawn at as to, as a CASA, like what our child wants and what we think is best? Or do we not cross that line and leave it for someone like Jennifer to cross?
So, as the attorney, Jennifer would have to advocate for whatever her client thinks is best, as long as they have considered judgment. And if you don't mind talking about that just a little bit more, that would be great, Jennifer. But as a CASA, you can recommend what you believe is in the best interest for the child. Does that help?
That doesn't, the best interest doesn't have to be necessarily what the child wants.
Right. And what I've seen CASAs do in a wonderful way is they really get to know the child and the family. They explain very clearly in their court reports, you know, what is the history of the family, the home environment. They also express what the child has told them, certainly that the child does want. And also they may talk about their conversations to some extent with other family members and reasons as to why you're making a position that might be different from what the child is saying they want. My job when I am representing a child who has considered judgment is the same as any attorney who goes in and represents an adult client. It is to represent their position, to try to suppress any evidence that may not be that may not be consistent with their position, or it may be hearsay or other evidence that's not allowed in under the rules of evidence. So unlike when I'm in a best interest position where I may want to advocate for what I believe is in the best interest of the child, I'm much like the public defender, as you will see when you're in court. I'm going to probably be objecting to certain things coming in and very strictly advocating for the position my client has. But I think that's the wonderful job that CASAs provide. And even on best interest, sometimes child's attorney and CASAs will have some disagreement. Child's attorney may want a family member looked at more closely. CASAs may be concerned about the entire family, or vice versa. And I think you provide a wonderful and different perspective, because you have to remember, under the rules and regulations, I check in with my clients. We're required to check in at least twice a year and visit. I certainly do more than that. But I'm not meeting with them weekly or every other week. And you are all doing that. And you have the day-to-day knowledge that sometimes I lack. And I find CASA's wonderfly helpful to be able to tell me, hey, do you know about such and such going on that, your client might not have told you about? And I've had great situations where CASA's, I'm trying to think of what story to tell without telling somebody's current story. But I know in one recent incident, a CASA called and said, this family member he's looking at, by the way, there's some issues with other family members in that home, and you might want to know about that. And I really appreciate when CASAs reach out like that, because that's not always the picture I get. And the department workers are also pretty good at keeping me up to date in terms of what is going on. But even they sometimes are not as familiar with that as the CASAs.
That's a great point, Jennifer. This is Anna. And I was just going to say, we've talked a lot about being in very close communication with the social worker, but certainly the child's attorney needs to know about a lot of maybe not the day-to-day details, but they need to know about some of the big issues that come up. And the attorneys that we work with are very receptive to CASAs. So if there's ever an issue that presents itself, reach out to your supervisor, or you can reach out directly to the attorney. I think that's a great point that you have made.
And one point that I've seen come up recently in a couple of cases is getting medical approval to do procedures. A lot of our parents are not terribly cooperative, and I've seen it take a long time recently to get certain procedures approved. And eventually what happens is the director ends up having to sign off on that. So letting me know that something like that is going on, where we may need to push the worker to kind of move that faster. Because with some of our kids, it might not be an emergency, but they definitely need it done. Is there any other area that you want me to talk about in terms of what I do, like to get ready for a particular hearing that's coming up?
Can you probably talk about like the importance of knowing what types of hearings that we're attending, like whether it be a review hearing or a permanency plan?
Sure. It's real important knowing what kind of hearing you're attending, because you need to know what is your burden of proof that you have to put forward. For instance, an adjudication hearing, the rules of evidence are in full effect. The department is required to prove their case by preponderance of the evidence. They are required to have witnesses come in if they need a witness to testify, unless they've made arrangements. And, most of the time the departments and their attorneys are pretty good at handling that. But it's also important for child's attorneys and CASAs to let somebody know if there is a witness that may be needed to be brought in that somebody hasn't thought about. I know in one of my Hartford cases for a while, we were getting close to the permanency planning hearing, which is where the court makes the first permanency plan and possibly considers changing that permanency plan. And there had been a severe injury of the child that the evidence had really never been put on the record because the parents consented to the adjudication. But as we got closer to closing this case out and wanting, possibly with placement for a relative, wanting to make sure the court put in the protections for that child as that child moved forward in the custody of the family member, that there had been some very serious injuries, that in that particular case, that child almost died. And it's important to get that medical information in. And sometimes it isn't brought in at the earlier stages of the case. Sometimes it's in the later stages of the case. You end up having to go ahead and get that. And I think that was one of my Hartford cases, and the CASAs there were very good at saying, you know, you definitely want to go look at these records and see what went on in the hospital when this baby was brought in. So those are great things to know about. And at permanency planning hearings, particularly if we're talking about closing the case, I definitely want to get on the record what I need to make sure that the child's permanency stays in place as they move forward, particularly if the case is closing or if the case is turning to termination, parental rights, and adoption. What services need to be put in place for that child as the case moves forward. I think the two biggest hearings that I'm going to have to worry about the evidence beyond the adjudication is going to be the TPR hearing and the permanency plan hearing, where we change plan permanently away from reunification with the parents. And those are the hearings that I'm going to need to really think about ahead of time, who my witnesses need to be, who do I need to call, do I need to issue a subpoena ahead of time? And those sometimes need to be issued at least 30 days ahead of the hearing, if I know it is going to be contested. A lot of our hearings are not contested. They go forward pretty much as uncontested or proffers. And in most cases you can do that, but in some you can't. And important really those cases at a time.
I had a question, and I'm sure we've already talked about it, but you mentioned in your outline about the fact that caseworkers have many cases, so they're oftentimes very busy, and the CASA is very important to the attorney in that case because the caseworker may miss stuff because they have too many. But what we talked about it before, but isn't it's the judge that decides? Because like if a caseworker has many cases, they don't all have CASAs, correct? I mean, only the judge determines which ones are appointed CASA. And is the attorney involved in that also, or is it just the judge? Or
usually I will ask for CASA at many of the hearings. I'd love to have one in as soon as possible in any case. Cecil County, I think if a case looks like something that's going to be open for a very short time, sometimes Judge Murray will not want to waste your resources on that case because you're needed for another case that may be open a lot longer.
okay.
But I like to see every child have a CASA involved. Before this, I came out of Talbot County where we had a CASA in every case.
Okay. I was just wondering about that because I figured if a caseworker has that many cases and is so busy, then why wouldn't it be the same for CASA? Unless there's more people CASA than there are caseworkers. I don't know anything about that yet, but.
We
Yeah,
definitely have more CASA volunteers than there are caseworkers.
There are? Okay.
I've got a question. I know maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but in that document that was sent out, toward the end of it, it said something about a CASA worker needed 3 years experience before they can play an integral part.
No, Maryland requires attorneys to have 3 years experience.
Or attorneys. I read it as CASA needed
Oh, okay.
to be I don't know.
No, Maryland Legal Services requires all attorneys working under the contract to represent children to at least have 3 years experience representing children as a best interest attorney in some field. And Maryland offers free legal training every year for young attorneys in that area. and courts frequently appoint attorneys in that area because they always need them for custody cases. So a lot of attorneys have experience in that area. That is a requirement that came along during my career. So thankfully, by the time it was in place, I had had certainly more than 3 years of experience. But any other questions?
I just had a general question for you, Jennifer. This is Anna again. And we've talked to Mr. Sabinico about this a little bit, but I always like to hear from all of the attorneys sort of what you feel is the most effective. Obviously, the CASAs are going to submit a court report prior to a hearing, but when it comes time for a CASA to speak, what information do you feel is the most beneficial for them to convey to the court?
Kind of case dependent. I think what is the most critical issue for that child? In some cases, it might actually be education related. There may be certain things going on at the school system or their placement where they're really not getting services they need. And maybe somebody needs to rethink the placement because of the particular school system. We've had situations like that. There may be something going on with a relative that continues to try to call in, may not be taken all that seriously by the caseworker, or the caseworker's just not getting back to them. If you're aware of the family member that there's a resource, Maryland law requires first and foremost that the department and the court look at relative resources first. Certainly pointing that out and saying, you know, hey, I've talked to so-and-so and they keep saying they're trying to get in touch with the department. Bringing that out to the court can be really important. Any other questions?
How often during a CASA situation now, one of the cases that were presented this week about the woman who had her kids, lost her kids, got her kids back, and then relapsed, the second chance type thing. How often does that work where a parent who screws up or whatever the second time? I mean,
Oh, it happens all the time.
oh, okay.
Unfortunately, if the parent does what they're supposed to do within a reasonable period of time, the children want to go back, the department says they feel comfortable, that child's going to go back, even though we know that the situation may not be that stable and the children may come back into care again at some point. Unfortunately, I've had those kids come back time after time sometimes. It's not something you want to have happen. And sometimes you'll go to adjudication with the case for the first time, and the child goes home after the adjudication because the department really doesn't have the maybe evidence to prove what they really need. And then 3 months later, you get a call and it's about this particular child. There's been another incident, and then the child may come into care. Or you may have the children for 2 years that you're working with the family, and then they go home and then they come back into care. And your parents hold it together.
It all goes back to that whole, it depends on the case and it depends on the situation, because there's no 2 cases that are the same. If there are aren't any other questions for Ms. Treff, I would like to thank her and not take up any more of her time. So last call for any other questions. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. It's always super helpful.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Cool. Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns over anything that we talked about just now? Okay, well, we have a couple of things that we're going to talk about, but first I'm going to switch it over to Anna, and she's going to go directly into advocacy for LGBTQ youth.
Okay, so I don't really have a guideline that I'm, a format that I'm talking about tonight, but I'm going to try my best to cover this very important topic. So we do have LGBTQ youth in care in Cecil County, obviously, and I'm going to talk specifically about one case, but you're welcome to ask any questions that you have. So the primary case that I'm going to be talking about is a youth in care who is a female transgendered young adult now. She's almost a full adult at this point. Her name is Lucy. Lucy has been in care for many years now. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that her advocate sort of handled all of this information. So when the advocate first met Lucy, Lucy was introduced by a different name. She was introduced by her birth name, and very quickly, Lucy identified herself as a female and by the name that she chose, which was Lucy. The advocate had known her for less than a month at this point and did a fantastic job at adapting to that change. Lucy did not come from a supportive family, unfortunately. She did not feel accepted by her peers. She did not feel accepted by her family. The advocate was really the person that she was able to identify with, and she felt comfortable enough to share that with them. Cecil County has its issues, as that does the whole country, and the fact that Lucy was able to tell her advocate that I'm a female was huge. And that advocate has done an amazing job with Lucy. Lucy she's undergone a ton of changes since the time that she became the advocate. She's worked through family issues and sort of the anger and the backlash that her family might have given her after she identified as a female. And Lucy has started and stopped hormone treatments, which was, it's a very big deal. It's a very big commitment for somebody to do, and for somebody to trust enough to confide in somebody else. So as soon as Lucy informed the advocate of her new name, the advocate has always referred to her with the correct pronouns, has never wavered in her support of Lucy. And that is really, I think, the most important thing that we can say about this subject is LGBTQ youth are they're youth. I mean, they are young adults or children who are struggling through a major change. And I think the more supportive people that they can have surrounding them, the better. They are going to be facing backlash often, not always, but I think in this area often. Yes, Kristen, go ahead.
And even be stuck in foster homes that are severely against your identity. And I think that is extremely traumatizing, and that's very important to keep in mind, that you don't know what that youth could be going through if they're in a foster home that's disapproving.
Well, there was the case this week about the kid. Now, he got put in with a gay couple, Now, I mean, do you have a backlog of people, you know, with the similar, you know, similar situations? I mean, that will uh, take in
And,
kids.
and that example is definitely a feel good. And I wish that was more of a norm. It's not, I'm not going to say it's a normal thing for something like that to happen, but it was definitely a feel good. And that's what that youth went through was life changing for him. So that's an amazing story. I love that story. But
So
unfortunately,
as
that's not what
Is
Lucy
that
was.
kind of a fairy tale, Kristen?
What?
Kind of a fairy tale type story, though. I
I don't
mean,
want to say a fairy tale, but it's like a
So
unicorn, I guess.
as a CASA, if we do encounter one of our youth being identifying as any part of the spectrum, and their foster home isn't for it, like is very, very against it, what do we do in that situation? Because it can have such traumatic, um, it can
Contact your
very,
supervisor.
okay.
Contact your supervisor.
Yeah, that's
Your supervisor.
yeah, that's definitely something you wouldn't want to um, withhold. That's an important thing because we always want the child to be in a home where they feel safe and comfortable and, you know, they don't feel like something about them is made to feel wrong. We would never want them to feel that way.
And that was the
And
first thing.
that has happened. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That was the first thing that Lucy's advocate did, was work on getting her out of the foster home that she was placed in, because they were very disapproving of who Lucy is. So that was really the first
And,
thing that the advocate was able
and
to do.
it's a tough situation because there's always so many different factors. Like Lucy's sibling was in that home. So, you know, it's a balance of being with the sibling versus, you know, moving to a different home. You know, there's so many factors that play into it. But it's something that you might not know the answer to, but if you're uncomfortable with anything that's ever going on at a foster home, talk to your supervisor because we can help you work through it and come up with ideas and to address it.
Did Lucy get placed there because she wasn't identifying as Lucy first, or it wasn't known how the foster parents felt about it, or it was because of the sibling? How did she end up in that situation?
So Lucy came into care under her birth name, and she was placed there. When the department is able, they will place siblings together. So that was sort of how she ended up in that situation. You know, once it was made clear that particular family was not comfortable with Lucy's identity, you know, as soon as possible, she was moved into a different situation.
well, I would think there would be something on the questionnaire if they're applying for, you know, foster care, that would you be comfortable with? I mean, there ought to be a box that says, you know, how do you think you could cope with the situation, if it would be, you know, reasonable for you.
Right. And again, at that point, Lucy was not completely open about her situation with everybody. She was not comfortable identifying herself. You know, again, that's a very difficult thing for any child to go through, but particularly a child who, you know, their placement might depend on them protecting their identity. So, you know, a child who is faced with the situation of, okay, I might be able to stay in this foster home with my sibling, but I can't show them that I'm a female. You know, that is it's a very tricky situation for everybody involved, unfortunately.
Are there any further questions on what Anna has spoken about thus far? Because that was kind of the whole story that we're able to share. Yeah,
Broad overview.
broad overview. There's a lot of intricacies, but
This is kind of more of a general question, not pertaining exactly to Lucy, but in general, I know we said it's a fairy tale to end up maybe in the foster family that meets you as well as that one case. But are there a lot of foster families out there for children, just in general?
No. I'm just going to be blunt. No, unfortunately, there is a huge shortage of foster families throughout the entire country, but definitely in Cecil County as well. We do have some same-sex couples who are incredible foster parents in the county. I think that I hesitate to say most. I think that a lot of the foster families that we have would not turn down a placement because that child identified as LGBTQ. Lucy's situation, and again, you know, it was just, the whole thing was just a little bit convoluted. But I would hate to think that a lot of our foster families would turn down a queer youth, but it does happen. Queer youth throughout the country tend to come into care more often, unfortunately, because of their identity and because of sort of the stigma of what they're going through. So I don't see that a whole lot in Cecil County, luckily, fingers crossed right now. But it's certainly, we just wanted to make all of the advocates aware that that is something, you know, that we need to be aware of and we need to be considerate of. And if it's something that you don't feel comfortable with and you don't want to come out and say right now, it's understandable, please let us know. You know, we can work with you and we will do our best to make sure that you guys all have the best possible placement.
I have a question about that. As in Lucy's story, the advocate was very good and comfortable and made Lucy feel very good about herself. But what if you don't have that kind of background, or you don't have enough experience, or you don't know enough? You may not feel comfortable. Now, is the child, would the child also be getting some type of mental assistance through, you know, psychological assistance or assistance from someone else also at the same time?
Right. So anytime that you are assigned a child and something comes up and you don't feel comfortable with it, again, and I'm sorry to keep on repeating it, but please reach out to your supervisor.
No, I get that, but I'm just saying that not that you wouldn't feel comfortable, but you don't want, I mean, that's very, very important to not lead them in the wrong direction. I mean, you have to, that's very careful. So you don't want to mess it up. So you just want to make sure you do it the right way. So that's what I'm getting at.
Yes, no, absolutely. And there are a ton of resources that we are able to provide. There is a lot of information about this topic particular, but any topic that you any issue that you run into with the child that you're serving, we have a lot of educational resources that we are able to provide to you. We don't want to put you in a situation where you feel uneducated or you feel like you don't know enough in order to advocate for that child. So yeah, we have a lot of things that we are able to provide to you. Kristen?
And I just want to say, if a youth does feel comfortable enough to come out to you, it might not be something you're expecting. It might not be something that you are knowledgeable in how to respond, but just making sure that they know that they're heard and they know that they're not judged.
Right, exactly.
That they are treated just like you did 5 seconds ago. I think that is a very important thing, that they're in a safe space. Just
exactly. There's no shock factor there. You're just having a conversation. Right. Okay.
As a retired journalist, I'm wondering, has CASA or whatever been able to maybe get the stories to the media? To me, to this day, it's very topical about the movement, and to let people know that, hey, there are kids who maybe need compatible type families, but like I say, just take it to the media.
I know there's a sign on Route 40 about foster families needed and help needed.
Yeah.
I've passed several.
The department,
But I
the
mean, this
department advertises for that.
I mean,
Our specific cases are confidential, Tom, so it's not like we could share,
you
you
could
know, any of that.
we you know, newspapers still do anonymous things. I mean, it's happening every day in this political climate. I mean,
Tom, are you asking like,
well, I mean,
should the department be advertising directly for certain types of people to become foster parents, not talk about certain cases?
taking cases such as Lucy, but I mean, you know, you can do it anonymously, and you know, names don't even have to be, you know, don't have to be used necessarily, but
Yeah. Well, the name isn't
So
the only thing that protects a child.
Right.
Making sure you're not sharing
But
their
actually,
story is very important.
I was going to say, Lucy herself has been a strong advocate as she's gotten older, and she's been involved, and she's shared her story on her own. And, you know, that type of thing, she's been very, she's done that in the past. And so that type of thing has been done to try and, you know, change things within the system and get things that are needed. So that's an avenue that I think is similar to what you're saying in order to get reach a broader group of people.
Yeah, so after a child is 18, they do have that ability. If they would like to share their story, if they would like to share the fact that they are in foster care, that is their decision to make. They are an adult, whether or not they are in care. So, you know, while it would never be, you know, the reason I'm sharing Lucy's story with you is obviously because you've all signed the confidentiality agreements. You understand that this is something that you're not going to go out and share with anybody. I would never share her story with anybody outside of CASA or DSS, even in a hypothetical term. I would never change the name and say, well, you know, Sarah is a transgender female. It's just not appropriate. That is Lucy's story and Lucy's story alone, and it is up to her whether or not she decides to share it.
well, then you could draw from your, you know, your graduated CASA people that, you know, okay, listen, we got a chance to do this, convince them to go to the media. I mean, by the time they get 18, 21, whatever, I mean, they're pretty much where they want to be, hopefully. And that if, you know, if they take their story to a newspaper, I mean, I think everybody's kind of skeptical of the media these days. And, you know, we're not all bad people. You know, we're not just looking for juicy, you know, confrontational stories. You know, we want to
Tom,
help.
there are a lot of resources out there that have been published that I think have the voice that you're talking about. Maybe not on a county level, but we have in our newsletter and some other places linked some stories that have been shared by people as they've gotten older and they're, you know, more comfortable sharing.
Hey,
Okay.
Tom, Jermaine, if it's any consolation, as an LGBTQ member, we know it's common knowledge within the community, so it's not like a secret. Hence my being here.
What was that last thing, Jermaine?
I was saying, as an LGBTQIA
Right.
community member, it's common knowledge within the community, hence part of the reason of my being here.
And I really appreciate that because the representation and children being able to see themselves within their advocates are very important. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
if
you
it's
so much for being here.
one who experienced it firsthand, we have a close friend that went through it. When I say it, specifically meaning being displaced out of a home because your family rejected you.
And that's not okay. And being able to be here, you're making a difference. So thank you.
It's my pleasure.
So we're about to wrap up. There are a few things. This is our last virtual session. So next week, there will be another Google Classroom. Sorry, there will be another Google Classroom, and that's going to be like the final assessment. And then in conjunction with that, there's also going to be sexual abuse and harassment type of training that all of our advocates have to do. So that will come out as well, and I'll send everybody an email for what to look for that, but that will not be in Google Classroom. That will be a separate platform. But Google Classroom next week is going to be an assessment that will have to be completed by, I don't have the date on me, Sunday the 19th, or no, not 19th, Sunday the 21st. And that will be the completion of this portion of our training. However, we are going to send out a sign up genius, and we're going to try to split this class in two and do our court report writing session in person. Court report writing is a very difficult topic to convey virtually because there's cases that we need to talk about and read and interviews and placements on where to put things. So we're going to try to meet in person, 4 people for one session and 4 people for another. And if you want to put it on your calendar now, that's going to be Tuesday, July 14th. And we'll do one at, 2 p.m. and another at 6:30. Is that what we were talking about? Okay.
I believe so, yeah.
2 p.m. and 6:30. I will send up a sign up genius probably the beginning of next week. So I highly encourage you to sign up for the time that you need as early as possible. I wanted to give you guys more than a month's notice so that you knew that we were going to come in and do this training for this training class. And who's not here? Ashley's not here, so we need to make sure to let her know as well.
I'm sorry, I dropped my pen. Can you tell me the date you said, July 14th at 2 and 6?
2 p.m. and 6:30.
Approximately how long will each of them take?
So you only have to attend one. We're splitting it.
Yeah, I guess approximately how long
What do you
does
think? Like 2-ish hours max?
At the most, I would
Yeah.
say 2.
July 14th, I'm sorry, times again, 2 and 6, was it?
It's 2
2
p.m.
and
and
6:30.
6:30.
Okay.
And this is one that we have to actually meet in person, correct?
Correct. It's the one thing that we have to meet in person. Court report writing, it's just it's a technical thing.
Absolutely.
And it was going to be a hard thing to do training virtually. And now that Governor Hogan made this new announcement with our new phase, and we're all able to really be together. So we're going to try to do that.
And I was going to say, and if for some reason that date, I know, you might be on vacation or something else is going on, or you just still are only comfortable meeting one-on-one, we can set up, we can individually schedule that to meet one-on-one to do that training, if your schedule doesn't permit. So just reach out to us if that's the case, and we can get that.
Swearing in will be after the completion of the court report writing session.
Okay.
So you'll complete your assessment next week, and then you have a few weeks to plan or do whatever you need to do, and then we'll do this court report writing in person.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Yeah,
Can I put my time in now?
What was that, Shelley? I'm sorry.
I said, can I put my time in now?
Yeah. Well, let me send out the sign up genius. Everybody will get it at the same time, but I will send that out.
Okay.
I'll
Thank
send
you.
it out this week.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
I was wondering, is there some way we could maybe get some feedback on our responses to the questions on the in the cases that were cited? I mean,
Oh, please don't.
So what we're going to do, the other portion of what we're going to do is after you're completed your assessment, everybody has had like a one person, either Sally, myself, or Anna have been like your contact person for training. That person will reach out to you and try to schedule a time after you've completed your assessment to just talk about the training, talk about your answers, and go over any questions that you may have.
And that's something we always do. That's not even specific to this virtual format. We always do a kind of an exit interview when we complete a training. So we make sure that you've got all the information we feel is important and a grasp of that. And then also you can, share if there's something you feel you want more information on or you're not quite comfortable with, it's just a time to review the whole thing.
But the rule is you can't make a comment about not knowing enough about court reports.
So
I had a
Kristen, one thing, oh, go ahead.
Just as far as the whole process is going, I understand courts are opening and everything. So will our background checks be going underway? And is there anything else besides the court that needs to be open for a background check to be done?
So the background checks have already gone through. We've been able to get those background checks that you've already filled out to the court. The only background checks that are going to need to be completed now are the CPS background checks, which are the child abuse registry backgrounds. And that is a form that you'll need to fill out and have notarized, and it'll have to be returned to us. And then there's also a fingerprinting portion of background checks that everybody will also have to do, but that's not for pretty far in the future because we do that through Cecil College and they are not open until at least September. And that's as of today. I don't know, that could obviously change. Are there any other questions, Sally? I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to bring up was if you want more information on the topic for today, that webinar, what is the best place, or can you send it out, or how do you want them to get that?
It's on our website. If I can send the link out direct or to you guys in an email. That's not a big deal. I just don't like overwhelming anybody with email. But it's also just on our website under COVID resources.
I was gonna say they could each ask, the person that they're communicating with too, and we could pass it along to you if you want more information on that topic, because it was a really good webinar. So I recommend listening.
Are there any other questions for tonight? Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And have a great night. It was a good class for this being the first time we do anything like this. So thanks for going along with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Have a good night.
We can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah, for real. Bye, everyone.